All right, so good morning, everybody. Really happy to have you here at the camp, wherever you might be joining from. A little bit of a fun disclosure here on a beautiful Friday morning or afternoon, wherever you happen to be. I live here in the Dallas area, and I'm just outside of one of our North Dallas suburbs, believe it or not, in an area that could be considered country, but really isn't. I mean, it's just a stone's throw from all of civilization. And I had the most fortunate event of my internet being compromised kind of within that kind of larger geographic area. So pivoting and overcoming a first world problem to be with you today. I'm joining you from this lovely, never to have been used room in a hotel, what's in my area today. So how about that? We can overcome, and I'm glad to be with you. So let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen, maybe kind of going through some general housekeeping in terms of what we're going to do today. So as you can already tell, I think the majority of the lines have been muted, and that's fine. We're going to have an opportunity probably for Q&A at the end, and it could be as lively as you want it to be. I mean, remember, we're at camp, so let's have a little bit of fun. If you have questions along the way, either for me or for Paul, who will be joining me, who's our special guest from Indian River State College. The chat function is probably best. We've got a Workday partner in crime, Shane Topping, who's going to be helping us out with monitoring that and making sure the questions get fielded. And that leads us to our last housekeeping point, is that we'll try to field or answer as many of those questions as we can. But in the event we run out of time, our promise to you is that we'll get back to you via email post-session, so that you can feel like you had those questions answered. So without further ado, I hope you're in the right place. I actually I'm super happy to be here with you, because we're going to be talking about something that's actually pretty important to me, which is cutting through the marketing hype of the day and actually focusing on those things that matter most in terms of success for all organizations. So realtor photo, boom, there it is. I don't know why it's on my slide, but you can see my video anyways. So moving on. In the headline of today's session, we talked about kind of the marketing hype, the jargon that's completely abuzz today. And I present this very funny cartoon from, let's call him somebody who's into cartoon satire. He's very good at observing what's happening in terms of market trends with technology. His name is Tom Fishburn. And he publishes a new cartoon every single week. And this one's from a bit, maybe a little bit back, but it sort of resonates today. And I don't share this to say that I don't believe there's real opportunity in terms of AI or ML or blockchain or whatever it is. But I do want to share this to say, look, my talk today is not to talk about buzz. I really want to focus on those things that are most important. Think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you will. We're going to talk about some pretty foundational stuff that's really imperative to every organization as they seek for the opportunity to become sentient or intelligent over time. And we're going to also talk about what the most critical element of that journey might be. So maybe as a bit of qualification, like, why are you hanging out with us today, and how did I actually end up at this camp? I was promised s'mores. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you got them. This is a crazy number. You don't have to be a math major to figure it out, but if you kind of move past the commas, do me a favor, put your pinky up to your mouth and say billion after that 197. We're pretty much right at 200 billion, and I'm not going to make you guess, I'll tell you. That's the number of transactions that we handled within our service in calendar year 2019 across all of our customers. Now, when you think about that in terms of scale, you're like, okay, it's a big number. We're really bad, by the way, as humans, being able to understand what big numbers actually mean. So I'll create some context for you. That number is effectively the same number of tweets that happened in 2019. But I would also argue that those transactions are infinitely more important than what the Kardashians are having for breakfast or what some elected official is thinking every 5 minutes, right? These are very important things that happen with all of our customers, specifically within higher ed. right? The student enrollment process, coordinating with the bursar's office, doing all those very important things that might seem kind of transactionally mundane on some level, that help the business do what they've got to do. So that's the qualification. When I wanted to have this opportunity to share with you what I think engagement matters, why it matters, and what we're going to do with it. So in the world of academics, let me present my thesis to you today, which is every single one of us have an amazing experience with technology at home. But there's this chasm that exists between what we do in our home life and what we do in our work life. And it's deep, and it's wide, and it's depressing. So let me ask, who's guilty, right? What's one of the first things that you do when you wake up in the morning, right? Because most of us don't use alarm clocks anymore. We're so evolved. We now use our phones for our alarms. And so probably I would guess, if I was wagering right now, almost everybody in this campfire meeting probably wakes up to an alarm on their phone. And then interestingly enough, as soon as you hit it for a few times, because we're all snooze lovers, then you start to say, okay, well, what's happening, right? Maybe it's your news feed, maybe it's your Twitter feed. If you're not a Gen X like me, maybe it's your Instagram feed or Snapchat or whatever those things are that are important to you maybe it's TikTok, who knows. Anyways, the point is that you're going to be engaged basically from moment zero, having received what I hope is enough rest to carry you throughout the day. And it's pretty enlightening because you feel like it knows you, it's contextual, it's personalized. And then all of a sudden we start to wake up, we drive to work, we park in the parking garage, we start to walk across the street, and our shoulders start to slump, right? We start to kind of like lean forward a little bit. We're not sure that long walk is going to result in the experiential type of stuff that we come to expect and love at work. And so when we think about that, then let me just share with you this quote from Twitter that I grabbed a while back from a gentleman named Henrik Jorgteg, who works in some level of technology, specifically responsive design type stuff. And I actually think what he posted here, even though it's a little bit raw by using the word suck, right? I don't know if that's offensive, but it's really true. If you don't actively fight for simplicity, actively guard against it, complexity is going to win. And you have to understand, complexity is the enemy of all things. It's the enemy of progress, it's the enemy of security, it's the enemy of innovation. Complexity just makes things suck. And so we're like, well, how long have we had this aspiration for simplicity? Is it a modern type thing? And I would argue, no, it's not. Like if we go back millennia, the way that we communicated, if we were part of the Egyptian DNA string, right? It was very simple. This was recorded history. It was literally bird, bull, man, bird, snake, right? I mean, just recording in very simple imagery to make sure that we could have those things or those thoughts or those rules or those observations persist through time. Now, again, some of you are probably like, okay, I get it. That's like thousands of years ago. It's no longer relevant in today's world. And I would say, well, is it really? Really? Because all of you who have cell phones, you're doing the same thing as the Egyptians were doing on stone, right? Except you're just doing it in a very digital form. And what's interesting is that, especially a father of 4 children, like if my kids send me a goofy text to our family's group text, and I reply back with basically rolling my eyes, they all know what I'm thinking. And all I had to do was send one simple image. Now, I'm also not going to say that we haven't evolved, right? There is evolution in all things. I mean, had we not evolved, we'd probably all still be listening to this band. And this is your first opportunity to, if you're allowed to institutionally, win a gift card. So this one's a really hard one. So if you'll go ahead and go into the chat screen at this point, and the first one to answer who this band is correctly, I'll actually email you a $25 Amazon gift card. And then you can also have the credibility at the end as we out you to the rest of the group here around the campfire that you, for some reason, knew who this was. All right, so moving on. Yes, we have evolved. It is important, but also to think about the evolutionary expectations of that evolving, right? We've been trained in terms of how things should work. And so, for example, when we're shopping online, it's got to be fast, it's got to be responsive. And if it's not, we're going to leave and go somewhere else, which is probably why Amazon wins a lot, because they're freaking fast and they're really responsive. But what if what we experience in one domain starts to matriculate into the other domain? What if this actually happened in real life, where you roll up to the Target counter or the Walmart counter or the whatever counter, and you see, hey, you know, we'll be back in 3.2 seconds. You're like, yeah, that's just not enough. I need something faster. And you abandon your cart literally in living color and walk out the doors. What if that happens to your students who are pursuing opportunities locally? What if they walk in and there's a line for registration? What if there's a line for counseling? Will they wait? Some of them might not. And so then how do we actually cross that bridge and become more engaging and more consumer grade? It's really important to really consider this too. Another thought leader on Twitter, I've provided the handle up there for you. He basically argues out that nobody wants to use your software. And for me, somebody who's built a career in software, it's like, oh gosh, how do I really feel about that? But he builds upon it by saying, look, people want to do this thing called live life. They want to live. They want to play with their dog. They want to go on a boat. They want to do those things that actually matter most. And so to round out, he's like, look, your software, your service, whatever it is only as good as the experience it allows others to have. And that's so true. So sometimes we need to think back and abstract a bit from the things that we've created, and then think about it from the lens of those who are using it to say, are we creating an opportunity for experiential greatness? And if we aren't, then what? And that spans the chasm of all things in life, not just software. So the second opportunity for you to chat it out, and this will actually be, this is a super easy one. You don't have to know weird 80s music history to win. The second opportunity is for you to chat in the chat box right now and share who or what your favorite app is on your phone. So as you do that, we'll select randomly towards the end out of all the people who actually do reply to that chat to share their favorite app, and I'll send a $10 gift card as well to Amazon. So as we go through then, let me share, while you're thinking about your favorite app and sharing it out in the chat, what some of mine are. So 2 apps on the top that are really relevant to how I used to play, especially pre-COVID. I know that my travel has actually been, it basically went to 0 in March. But I grew up in Germany. I spent most of my time living in a university town over there. In fact, the oldest university in all of Germany, in Heidelberg. And I still go back every year with my family. And it used to be really hard. But from a user engagement perspective, Airbnb changed everything, because now I can literally surf the inventory. We can select an apartment in Outstadt, and we can go downtown. We can be close to all the cafes, whatever it is, and it's perfect. Another thing that I've been doing lately, especially during COVID, is this thing called genealogy. And you're like, well, Joe, you don't look old enough. I don't know why. I love it. I love understanding where I came from. And by the way, I don't have any Egyptian DNA that I know of. But it was interesting to find out that my great-grandfather Luke was born in Monterrey, Mexico. Okay, why wasn't I ever told that growing up? So these are really fascinating things, but clearly I'll be like full disclosure here. The one app that saved my life with 4 kids at home, especially during COVID, yeah, it's that chicken, man. I don't know why, but it literally has changed everything. And so I've spent way too much of my money, you know, thinking about how I keep the kids fed. But the point is it's so easy. And that's what we need to think about, because it really is about experience. The experience does matter. And so let's start to shift then to say, okay, well, if experience matters, for example, with my Chick-fil-A app, does it in fact matter where we work? And I would argue it does. There is a chasm between home life and work life, but I don't think it's one that can't be overcome with enough focus and attention, especially as you start to hold others in the vendor space accountable for delivering on that experience. So let's look at that for a second. As I bring in Paul here after the end of my opening comments, and as we go to more of a Q&A construct, he's going to be talking about data as one of the lead-in comments or thoughts. And I think this is highly relevant because if you haven't read this book yet, it's from a book called The Sentient Enterprise. I make no money from this. I'm not going to send you a special link where I get a credit for it. So just go out to your favorite bookstore and get it. It's written by a practitioner and an academic. And typically when those two things happen, I don't know. I get lost in the sauce. But this 120 pages of short reading is something that I would highly recommend for anybody in your organization. It's not just for IT folks. It's not just for the folks in finance or in student registration. It's for anybody. And so this gentleman who worked at eBay and this gentleman who was tenured with the Kellogg School at Northwestern, they came together and created 120 pages of actionable material about how you take an organization from agile to aspirational sentient. But they talk about some really interesting things here around how people and processes and technology all have to coalesce around data. Now, that's not anything new to any of us on the phone. We understand that. We've all had these magic boxes called core systems of records in our institutions or our organizations for as long as we can remember, probably. These were databases where all these things went to live. Basically letters and numbers, formatted in certain ways, they all live there. And then these magic little elves in the back can actually make reports for you. They extract data from it. It's really baseline. Super low on the value chain, super low on the productivity chain, but very necessary to be able to capture and store. About 5 or 6 years ago, people started to talk about this thing called a system of engagement, this evolution, if you will, from a system of record. And everybody started chattering about it because it's so important to get people in, because if they get in, they're going to start using it more and we can trust the data, blah, 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 blah. And that lasted for about a hot minute until the marketing organizations took over. And the shark frenzy literally commenced around all this thing called AI, ML, systems of intelligence. And that's all people talked about anymore. But for those of us on the phone who grew up in academia, either as a customer or as an employee thereof, we probably have all heard of this Maslow's hierarchy thing where you have to traverse in a very hierarchical manner. And if I look at this, and I look at the system of record at the very base level, and I look at the aspirational side, I can quickly identify that I have to have engagement if I have any hopes of ever getting to a system of intelligence. Now, that's just not Joe's observation. You know that's true. Every one of you on this call, because you're all guilty of using applications like these. Yes, I said guilty. How many of you have watched way too much Netflix since March? Right? Raise your hand, guilty. Well, the reason why it works is because the engagement level is so high that I can actually use that engagement data from a very large population, right? Spanning geographies to create recommendations that are actually pretty pointed. Now, I don't think any of you really know me on the phone or on this call, and that's okay, but maybe you probably are looking at my video today going, you know what? That guy does not look like a Zooey Deschanel fan. Well, you're wrong. And I didn't even know it because I like historical fiction and I watch a lot of it on Netflix. But all of a sudden the recommendation engine one day said, Joe, you need to watch this show called New Girl. I don't think I'm a New Girl guy, but they were right. Because that engagement data over time, looking at what I've seen of as my profile or how I interact with the service, made the correct recommendation. It's the same way that enhancement drugs stay out of my inbox on Gmail because 1.5 billion users are quickly identifying those as spam and keeping them out. It's why PayPal's fraud detection works. They know when something's happening before we do and they alert us. It's why ride sharing has become the easiest way because those patterns over time with 5 billion rides in 2019 globally identify where the car should be before we even know we need them. So then if engagement's so important, then what? Well, for those in academia, right, I went to the source of all knowledge and truth where all your students are quoting from nowadays in your paper. It's called Wikipedia, right? And I asked, like, what's this thing? What is happening here? It's called a network effect. The premise of a network effect is that as a good or a service has an additional user, it becomes better through the addition of every user of that good or service for the collective whole. And that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it's absolutely and fundamentally true. The more engagement, the better quality of data. The better quality of data, the better predictability opportunities that you have in terms of intelligence or sentience. And so you're like, gosh, this all sounds great. You know, every one of our institutions, we evaluate these opportunities. When the evaluations happen, everybody comes in and they all sound the same. They're saying the same words. They look the same, and it's super hard, right? Well, I want you to like think about the opportunity that you have today with data that's in your hands. It's in this magical place. It's called the internet, and it's on most computers today. And if you will go to the internet, and if you spend a little bit of time to look closer, you're going to help your organizations avoid these traps. Now, when I present to a room full of millennials or sub-millennials, they will actually think this actually probably could be a modern television. But for those of us who grew up, you know, not in that age range, we know that looks a little funny. Even though they did a great job with the flush mount and they're selling us so that it's modern, it's flat screen, you're going to love it. We know the ownership is probably going to be compromised when you peek behind the proverbial wall of what happens post-sale, right? You have to be cognizant of this. Don't let the thin veneer of UI or something else distract you from the horrible experience that you don't get to see during the sales cycle that will absolutely cripple your ability to have meaningful engagement over time. So go to that public reference. Go to your app stores. This is liquid gold. If you type in the customers or the vendors that you're evaluating, you're going to get to see unadulterated reviews from a very large swath of population who are telling you exactly what they think. And it's not all perfect, but it allows you to gauge where the real momentum lies, and you get that feedback to say, hey, is any of this actually working? P.S. If people are writing reviews, there's another indicator of engagement. There's also a number of other places that you can go that are just free as the day is long. Some of you today and your institutions might be using Octa for single sign-on. They've made a strong run into the higher ed space. And it's really been interesting to see what they're doing across all industries. But because their system becomes that launch point for all of these applications through single sign-on, they have deep introspection into who's actually using what services. And it's fascinating because they provide this in an annual report every single year to show you which are the highest used applications running through that service. And it's a third party who really doesn't even care. They're just trying to get people to use single sign-on, which is the smartest thing out there today. But there's also this really cool thing on Google. It's called Google Trends. And I didn't want to basically put, you know, my company and other companies up there to show comparison. That's a bit cheeky and probably not the right thing to do anyways, especially around this magic campfire that we're all sharing. So I put some singers or some songwriters or some artists up there just for fun. My two daughters, who are 17 and 15, they are chatting nonstop lately about this like reunion of One Direction. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So here we are, One Direction, Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, Maroon 5, and Post Malone. Those are all the things that my kids keep talking about. I'm not even sure. I think I know a Lady Gaga song. Anyways. But you can see over the last 12 months, like what's happening here. Look at that staying power for Taylor Swift. Look at the peaks after December of 19 for Post Malone, and then basically into that day as well. It's interesting that you can gather real-time data, and Google exposes this from their kind of global search. You can narrow it down to just the United States, which I did here, or you can widen that aperture to any country or around the globe. So when you're trying to engage around what right looks like, and in terms of who has the momentum and who doesn't, why don't you just use the free internet that's on all of your computers and all of your mobile phones? That's not to say that I don't want you to engage with sales teams and do your due diligence, but go find your own answers. It's there and it tells you who's the most engaging. So again, trends.google.com, what a fun resource. I hope that I didn't introduce a black hole where you'll spend the next 5 days just kind of evaluating different types of keywords. That said, my invitation to you in summary before we move over to our Q&A with Paul is to really push the limits. Don't let that magic that happens at home be only something that happens at home. If you have to, be that force for change to really make that chasm shrink between home and work. And as a result, maybe you will in fact have a chance to delight those users within your institutions. Yes, it can be unicorn farts and sprinkles if you do the right things. Not every system of record will do that, but if you find the right place, I promise that you can get there. So without further ado, probably the main man of the hour that we have here today is a fine gentleman out of the state of Florida, Paul OBrien, who's the VP of Institutional Technology at Indian River State College. And Paul's agreed to join us as I think a happy Workday customer, Paul, and talk to us about some of the things that he's doing institutionally around data, around engagement, around mobile. And so maybe, Paul, for the first question I have for you is, we've talked before this session, so it's not like we've never met, but you've really made some clear arguments for how data is really the first step in enabling impactful engagement. Could you expand on that for the campfire today?
Well, first of all, good morning to everybody. And I'm here in a rainy South Florida today, so I dodged some raindrops. Not as bad as you happen to go to a motel, but all good. Made it to the office from the car, so we're still all in one piece. I think really to frame it up for us, I think really a lot of the data points that you hit there, Joe, with students today, students are much more focused coming in. They're much more cost conscious, much more focused on careers. And I think really when you start to look at the lens of student success is really institutional success in terms of keeping students on track along their journey. Then as we think about data, data at an institution tends to be, number one, very disparate, very spread out. So and I'm going to put a shameless plug in here for Workday Prism. But, and as I looked before Workday Prism, we had many rich data sources, but really the ability to mine that data and get meaningful insights was very limited. Right? And I can give some examples of that. So as we start to look at a student's journey throughout the institution, which we do from the point of view where we engage them as a prospect, so we bring them on board till they start into their programs, and then as we support them, hopefully all the way to graduation. There were many data points, many data sets. At one point in time, I counted that as I started looking at data sources, our advisors, for example, were looking at 21 individual data sources right separately. Now, I can tell you this, if you are absolutely determined, absolutely motivated, right, you might look at 2 or 3 of those, right, and try and put a picture together. And I think really what we've learned is that through Prism, we've been able to bring disparate data sources together in one place and really give insight to what's going on in a student's life. And I'll give you an example of that. We have a student population we really pay attention to as our incoming freshmen, that first year experience, getting them on the right track. We're a guided pathways institution, so we try to get you right off to the right start on the right pathway. And we're watching along that pathway. So, but as we know, students run into trouble, right, at different parts of their journey. One of the things that we learned is that we have an incoming freshman survey for all students coming into our organization. It's literally done by SurveyMonkey. It's a series of questions, and I'm telling you, that data we've been doing that now for approximately 7-8 years. That goes to maybe 2 or 3 people who look at it, and it's probably just sitting on someone's desk. What we did with Prism is we were able to actually bring in quantitative data from Workday and from our Blackboard LMS, along with that unstructured data. And now we're able to bring real value by bringing those reports together so that we could really get true insight. And in one particular case, we remember looking at a student who was struggling, and an advisor was looking at a predictive model that we've built, and we saw that the student wasn't doing well in several of their courses. But lo and behold, with that unstructured data set there, right beside that quantitative data, right, which you're looking at, was the comment from the student themselves, which says, I normally start out the semester pretty well, but as the semester moves along, the pressure of work and school often comes to bear, and I really struggle. So in terms of the engagement now, think about that. That student now in that advisor conversation is greatly enriched by the fact that the student has already given that advisor significant information about what's going on. And so now we were able to, in this case here, and I actually became aware of this problem because the advisor was telling me what she did is we actually found this student a job on campus, right? So that the student then, right, could continue their studies, but now they're on campus. So the fact that they were trying to earn money and make it off campus to their job, right, and trying to go to school at the same time, right, even though they were also taking some online courses, was really severely hampering their progress through the semester. So I think really it's just, that would just be one example of whereby we had disparate data sources, but when we started combine them, right, and bring them together in a meaningful way, there's a much clearer picture. And I think most of us who have done any research before, we're looking at quantitative data sets, but that qualitative data often enlightens us to what's really going on. And now that drives the kind of engagement here that we're able to make. In this case, we put this student in touch with our career center. The career center was able to find them actually an opening on campus, and we put them to work on campus. But I think at the data insights is going to drive the types of engagement, and really that the engagement becomes meaningful in solving a problem, solving an issue, and moving the student along their journey.
That's great, Paul. You know, one of the things that you had shared as we met a couple of times leading up to this campfire event, the phrase which really resonated with me is the fact that you guys can now hear the voice of the student in the data. And it's been interesting too to hear about your initiatives, I think, to meet not only the students, but also faculty and staff exactly where they are at your institution. And you mentioned mobile being kind of a primary driver for that. Could you share your experiences around that, specifically around how that's helped you or prepared your organization to move through some pretty unforeseen and wicked events like hurricanes or even the current pandemic?
I think really, I think that we can all agree, and probably from your little exercise there with the apps on our phone, that the consumer app now is now the standard for where our students judge interactions with our organizations and technology, right? And I think really, if we think in prior lifetimes, we had a case whereby really our ERP systems really drove the back office type of experience, and they were designed for back office people who were going to be using these tools. They were not really designed for students. And I think really particularly with Workday and mobile, right, we've now created this mobile first strategy. We've now created a way for us to be present in both employees and students' hands throughout the entire day, the entire week, and their entire career. And we can use that then as a way to engage with students, right? It may be, as simple as checking my own case, I'm checking inbox items all the time. I'm moving things along, right? So, but I do think that the movement towards the consumer app experience, I think, is ultimately where we need to be to kind of drive students along that journey, and in fact, employees as well. And so a couple of data points for us. One, on the student side, as we were looking through even prior to the pandemic, we were noticing that approximately 52% in fall semester last year of all Blackboard traffic for our LMS was through a mobile device, right? So clearly, it's the device that's in the student's hands. Now, personally, at my stage, I wouldn't like to be looking at the phone for taking a course, but with young eyes, I guess that's just seems to be working out fine. And we're actually looking at what the students are doing on the phones, and it's not just that they're checking grades, or they're actually participating in discussion posts. They're actually doing assignments in a mobile environment. And I think really that I think is kind of going to be a game changer for us in terms of now, with Workday, with Blackboard, with the things that we're doing, is having that mobile first presence with all students and meeting them exactly where they are. So that device is with them, as we know, at all times, right? I think some of them would need surgery to have it removed, but anyway, but I do think that's a primary driver for us.
Awesome. You mentioned it from the lens of the student. What's the change been, though, specifically to maybe faculty or staff as well? I know maybe not all of us in maybe the older generation have to have it surgically removed, but some of us do.
Yes.
And what's that done for kind of shrinking, I think, the engagement layer, specifically amongst those who are supporting the institution on a day-by-day, year-by-year basis?
So whether through the mobile first strategy now, I think I'd really look at our faculty as a case in point, right? So now when faculty are reaching out to the student, it used to be, and standard practice was in an institution like ours, that the faculty had to serve like 10 office hours a week, right? And so the student has to find that faculty member, can buy an office, right? I'm even talking before the pandemic, that obviously changed. But now we can see that through applications, right, that our students now are engaging with faculty and engaging with advisors, right, in real time, right, through apps like Blackboard Collaborate or through Workday inbox items or through whatever it happens to be, right? So now we've got a what I would call a continuous presence between faculty, staff, advisors, and students, right? And so that sort of brings the college community, so to speak, to bear, right, that they're available quite often in real time, right, throughout when the student needs them, right? So, and that's been quite the game changer for us, right? I'm kind of pleased by the fact that when we did switch to the pandemic, maybe these things that we had in place, and we had to switch our instruction to remote learning. One of the things that I noted, which we didn't talk a lot about, we talked a lot about the faculty side of it and the online learning piece, which was significant. But we registered our entire student population this summer of 12,000 students without a single student setting foot on campus, right? And we're seeing that that 80% of that traffic was over mobile, right, to do that registration. So clearly we have a tool in the student's hands that I think truly is, right, meeting the student exactly where there is and forming that basis for interaction between and engagement between the college and the student themselves and the faculty or any other stakeholder that we have in the institution. But I think that's a remarkable data point because when you think about it, they couldn't come here, but we were ready for them, right, in that sense.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And by the way, congratulations, 80% is it's fairly significant. When I think about that too, speaking about apps, just a kind of a PSA, if you will, on some level, you have to have a native app. If it's not a native app, it's just a responsive design website. There's a number of barriers institutionally that you're going to have to face. The first and foremost of which is that there is no biometric authentication after your first login. Right? So all of us use native apps by either facing in or using our thumbprint in. And let me tell you, the digital natives, those who are your students today, expect that. So if there's a barrier of a username and password at every single login, because it's not a true native app, your engagement level will actually sink to almost nothing. So it's interesting to see that. Now, let me ask you, though, about your aspirational. What's the next, Paul, in terms of engaging faculty, staff, or students, and maybe what's exciting about those future possibilities?
Well, we've got a couple of things that I think are kind of very exciting. The work that we're doing right now, I think we have now got a predictive model that I really want to expand through the entire institution, right? So, and really what we're trying to drive is think of that student journey. And what we're really after now is trying to really drive the data down. I often talk about the democratization of data across the institution, but I want to make sure that there's meaningful data in each person's hands who are responsible for a piece of that student's journey. And that's kind of where we're going next. So we're now designing faculty dashboards, faculty engagements, we're advisor dashboards, right? So let's think about a very simple case. If a student's struggling, for example, in mathematics, we really need to make sure the mathematics department is really aware where those choke points are, where those points are which the students are struggling. It doesn't do me any good to have institutional data and be able to point to the fact that, well, if they flunk math, the chances of earning a degree or something reduced by about almost 100% in many cases, since it's required to get out of here. So I want to really make sure that our math faculty have that data in their hands, right, at the time they need it. And so we've got a big initiative there around analytics and really bringing the analytics to the course level, right? What's happening across each of these courses by instructor, right, by type of course. So that's one area that we're very big in looking at. We're also looking at expanding our system of engagement. I mentioned another company, I think it's actually one of them on the call that we are talking to, is a company called Rah, which is kind of really looking at this holistic idea of engagement, because a lot of our engagement points at an institution, right? They're disparate, right? We've got text, we've got Facebook, we've got the college website, but really trying to solve that so that it's kind of a more holistic experience for the student and they can engage at the point in time with career counseling, with mental health counseling, right, with academics, with tutoring, wherever those touch points need to be, is trying to really establish bringing that together in one place is kind of where we're headed next.
And are you guys toying with any notion of AI ML?
Yes, we are. So we already started with that. So we have I mentioned that predictive analytics engine that we have. So right now, and I'll mention 2 data points with it. One data point is that week 0 of a course right now, we can predict at 83% accuracy a student will pass or fail that course with an A, B, or C, right? So we're very intrigued with that, but there's a lot of conversation around that, right? Because, for example, are we labeling the students? Faculty legitimately ask that question. If I predict you're going to flunk, right? Is that, did I self-label that along the journey, right? So there is some, I think, socialization of that throughout the institution and having those conversations. Interestingly, on the advising side of that, our advisors adopted that technology at 100%, right? And live with it religiously, of trying to see what that prediction is, because the prediction's changing every week. Every Wednesday, the prediction's updated because we're gathering data from the LMS, right? We're gathering data from the courses, from other data sources, and bringing them in. So that's the start. But where I really see the value of ML, I'm hoping in the future, is making sure that when students at the point of registration, I'm really interested in putting data in the students' hands that can really drive the student to make the correct choices for their guided pathway, right? So for example, it's well documented in higher ed, certain courses shouldn't be taken together, for example, caustic pairs, right? So what if we could put in the students' hands, like if you take this sequence of courses this semester in this order, right? Your chances of success are 92%. But you take these sequence of courses, now we predict your chances, because of students like you, are going to drop down to 64%. And so how do we use ML, right, or other deep learning type applications to kind of put data in the students' hands, which if you think about it right now is pretty limited, right? I mean, they can go out and they can get data on rate my professor, and they go out and they look at certain things, right, about what's going on. But I really see the value at that point of registration, right, will be one data point, right? And therefore, really making sure that the student has got the most information available to them at that point, right? And think about it, that's not something that an advisor even in that case could do for them, right? So I think you could start to see an AI type application there that would really create a very smart advising system, but it would not necessarily be human based, right? In that sense, right? It would be, expert advice at the point of registration. So I'm interested in that. We're interested in anything that allows us, I think AI is going to have, I think deep learning applications is going to profoundly change the entire landscape, both from the faculty side. I've got a student sitting in my class. I know that week 4, they're predicted now that they're going to flunk this course. What do I do? And I think the big conversation for us is going to be around those engagements, those interactions that take place, those interventions, because that's ultimately where the rubber is going to meet the road, right? I have this data point. What do I do with it, right? But the goal is to get that student to the finish line, right? And I'll give you a little data point that we have on engagement, why I think this is critical. So we looked at students being unsuccessful in their first semester, and there's a terrible statistic that comes out of that. If a student flunks one course at Indian River State College, I'm talking about this freshman student, right, who's just in, they flunk one course, the retention rate for that student fall to spring, for that population, falls to 30%. We're losing 70% of them with one course. If that same student engages with our tutoring services as an example, right, we actually retain closer to 60% of them, right? And we're trying to figure out, well, is that because of the engagement with the tutors are just that good and we got them on the right path, right? But a second data point, which has kind of opened up and made it interesting for us, if a student participates in one of our clubs or societies or kind of activities on campus, we actually retain them at a rate of over 70%, even though the same result has happened. And so we're now really looking at engagement as being a powerful tool to keep students right here in the institution. right? So in one sense, maybe in the tutoring center, the tutor did help the student out, and we fixed something, and we put them on the right path. But it doesn't explain that just them having an advocate, perhaps friends in a student club or a club mentor, right? That suddenly we're getting a similar result. In fact, it's actually a little bit higher when we looked at it from that type of engagement, right? And so I'm very, very interested in this whole idea of kind of holistic engagement across the institution.
That's fantastic. Love it. Hey, Shane, so I hear that we had a winner on the band guessing. First of
Yeah,
all, who was the winner?
yes, that this is true. This is true, Joe and Paul. It was Janine Samuel.
All right, Janine. So Janine, I'm both proud of you and shocked that you knew that the band's name was Kajagoogoo. They were basically a one-hit wonder band in the 80s. They sang a song, Hush Hush, Too Shy Eye to Eye, which is pretty epic. You might recall that if it's in your MP3 player. So well done. Do me a favor, reach out to Shane. If you have her contact information, maybe I'll just reach out and just proactively send the Amazon gift card. And then did we have any chats about apps that people are using today? And did you select a random one?
Joe, we'll sort that out in the back end. It was
Okay.
there was a flurry there. We got a flurry of.
Good, good. All right, we'll sort it on the back end and we'll select one randomly and send the gift card as well. So do we have time for that one question that came in?
Paul sort of covered it. Paul, it has to do with improving student success and sort of quantifying this in dollar amounts. I believe you guys went through an exercise to sort of wrap your arms around how you can incrementally, each percentage point. Do you want to speak to that, given your prison model is starting to see some benefits?
Yes. So we actually, when we first looked at it, we figured out that a 1% increase in retention at Indian River was valued at $300,000, right? As we looked at our population. We redid that exercise this year, in fact, and now it's gone up. A 1% increased retention now at Indian River is now worth over $500,000. And so I think really as we, it really puts a lens on when we start to look at investments that we're going to make, right? Because, if I invest in something like, let's say Prism Analytics, and I'm able to do some things, and that can equate to even a 1% increase in retention right across our population by giving advisors, in fact, a lot more insight. That is very quantifiable now, right? In terms of the costs and so forth and the time and effort that would go into developing some of these things, right? And so that's just a lens for us. I often kid around with Kevin Malloy. I'm sure he's probably here, that I get 2 or 3 percentage points in Workday's free, right? Out of all the work that we're doing here, right? But I think that is, all kidding aside, that is, I think what's now on the table, right? Is that the technology can become a true partner as opposed to just simply extending a back office functionality, right? So, and as I think it, as we think about the possibility of AI, and I know we don't want to hype it up, but I think we all have to realize that that those types of things being built into various applications across our institutions, like the example I gave at the point of registration, I think really can be a game changer for higher education. Think about this. I mean, we know the data ourselves, right? 60% of students manage to graduate with a baccalaureate degree after 6 years in a typical college in the US, right? That means 40% of our students are walking off with nothing necessarily. Okay, we've got some college credits under our belt, but they're not walking out with a credential that can lead to employment, that can lead to a life, can lead to a nice life, nice career. And we know especially across equity groups, that education is the vehicle by which we can move across, right, and close those equity gaps across our nation. So this is critical work. I think I'm very excited for where we are and where we're going. I often say, as far as our Workday journey at Indian River, our PRISM journey, we're at the very beginnings, right? And now that the system is in place, I think we're going to really be looking for, and Workday's been a great partner for us, but working with Workday and hopefully continue to inform about things that are really working and really can drive that student success equation.
That's awesome. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being a great partner thanks for holding us accountable. And thanks to everybody else for joining us today around this campfire session. I hope that you gained something from it. Engagement really does matter. It's how we're going to cross the chasm between all the awesomeness that we have at home and the things that we want to do at work. And if you push hard and hold others accountable, I think it's actually a possibility that we can achieve. So with that, I wish you a very great day, and look forward to sending those gift cards to those who won.
All right, goodbye, everyone.